My wife and I bought a fishing cabin on Lac des Penn 41 years ago, but I hadn't set foot in it for 23 years. She went back every summer without me. When she passed away last April, my son looked me straight in the eye and said, "Dad, just sell the damn thing already." I decided I needed to see it one last time before I signed anything. But the moment I pushed open that old screen door, I couldn't move. What I found inside that cabin changed everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd been married to for 38 years. I'm glad you're here with me tonight. Stay with me through this whole story, because it gets heavier than you might expect. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, because it genuinely means something to me to know how far these stories travel. My name is Douglas. No, wait. Let me start over. My name is Kenneth. I'm 68 years old, and 8 months ago I buried the only woman who ever really understood me in a cemetery outside of Sudbury, Ontario, on a grey March morning when the snow was still half a meter deep. Vivien was my entire world for 38 years of marriage. Now I sit alone in our house in the Glebe neighborhood of Ottawa, while my own children treat me like a problem to be solved on their lunch break. Before I go too far into this, let me say something plainly. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like you'd become invisible inside your own family, if you've ever felt like you were just another task on someone's calendar, I want you to know I see you. Because what I'm about to tell you took me 68 years to understand. The call came at 8:30 on a Wednesday morning in November. My oldest, my son Liam. No, I've used that name somewhere. My son's name is Conrad. Conrad works in commercial real estate in Toronto, and he doesn't waste words on sentiment. "Dad, we need to make a decision about the Lac des Penn property." He didn't say good morning. He never does anymore. "It's not urgent," I told him. "It is actually." His voice had that flat corporate quality I'd been hearing more and more since his mother died. The one he used for files that were taking up desk space. "You're carrying property taxes, insurance, seasonal maintenance, the dock permit. It adds up to close to $9,000 a year on a cabin you haven't visited since Harper was in his first term." He wasn't wrong about the last part. I hadn't been to Lac des Penn since 2002. Vivien went every summer, sometimes twice. She'd drive the 4 hours from Ottawa alone, spend 2 or 3 weeks up there, come back rested and quiet in a way I'd never quite managed to understand. I always had reasons not to go. A project at the firm, a standing tea time, a conference I'd committed to before I realized the dates overlapped with her trip. "Your mother loved that place," I said. "Mom's been gone for 8 months, Dad. The property is just sitting there." My daughter Simone got on the line then. She'd been listening on speaker from her condo in Mississauga. "Dad, I drove up there in September. The place is a mess. The dock boards are rotting. There's a family of raccoons living under the porch. The roof over the back bedroom is sagging." My chest tightened. Vivien had kept that cabin immaculate. She used to tell me about it in detail, the wildflowers she'd planted along the path to the water, the little herb garden she'd dug in beside the woodpile, the way the loons called just after dusk. If the roof was sagging now, it meant she really truly was gone. "I should drive up there," I said quietly. "Dad." Conrad's voice sharpened. "You're 68 years old. That's a 4-hour drive each way on the Trans-Canada and then a bush road. For what? To look at something you're going to list with an agent anyway?" 68. He said it the way you'd say a number on a piece of equipment approaching end of service. Like I was a furnace that needed replacing. Vivien would have had words for him. Strong ones delivered quietly. "The market in cottage country is still decent," Simone added, smoothing things over the way she always did. "Waterfront properties on lakes within 4 hours of the 401 are pulling 400,000, sometimes more. That's real money, Dad. Money that could go into a GIC or top up your RRIF, give you options." Options. They kept using that word, like they were doing me a favor by engineering my future for me. "I need to think about it," I said. "Dad." Conrad's patience had worn down to something thin and final. "You've had 8 months. The estate is basically settled. This is the last loose end. Loose end." That's what Vivien's cabin had become, a loose end. I told them I'd give them an answer by the end of the month. After I hung up, I sat in our kitchen in the glebe and looked around at the evidence of her. The ceramic rooster she'd bought at a market in Lanark County still sat on the counter. Her reading glasses were folded on top of a crossword puzzle she'd never finished. Half a jar of the rooibos tea she drank every evening. Maybe they were right. Maybe holding on to the cabin was just postponing the inevitable. But something Conrad had said kept circling back to me. He said the cabin was a mess, and I thought Vivien was meticulous. If the place was falling apart now, how long had it been falling apart? She'd been up there in July. She'd sent me a photo of the sunset from the dock. The dock that Conrad said was rotting. 3 weeks later I told Conrad I'd do it. I'd list the cabin. The relief in his voice was immediate. Too immediate. "Good call, Dad. I've already spoken to an agent in North Bay who handles recreational properties. She can get you an assessment next week if you want." Before we list it, I want to go up there myself, I said. They'll be personal items, things that belong to your mother. A pause. Is that strictly necessary? She spent 30 years of summer weeks in that place, Conrad. Yes, it's necessary. A longer pause. All right, but Simone and I will come with you. We can rent a van, make a day of it, sort through everything together. The absolute last thing I wanted was my children sorting through Vivian's private life with their sorting and liquidating mindset. They'd already done it with her studio at home. Conrad had wanted to donate her entire collection of oil paints to the school board and call it tax deductible. I need to do this myself, I said. Dad, it's a 4-hour drive. I've been making that drive since before you could walk. Your reaction time? My reaction time is fine. You've been scattered since Mom died, Simone's voice gentler. You told me last week you forgot to take your blood pressure medication 3 days in a row. She wasn't wrong. Grief had wrapped itself around my brain like wet insulation. Some afternoons I'd go to the grocery store and come back with nothing I'd gone for. Other mornings I'd stand in the shower until the water went cold and not notice. But this trip felt necessary in a way I couldn't put into words, even to myself. I'm going, I told them. Either you trust me or you don't. They agreed, reluctantly, on the condition that I call when I arrived, like a teenager with a curfew. I planned the drive for the first Saturday of December, before the highway conditions got serious. Conrad offered to hire me a driver. I declined. This needed to be alone. No running commentary. The night before I left, I went through the photo albums Vivien had kept in the living room cabinet. There were decades of photographs, all meticulously labeled in her neat, slanted handwriting. But as I worked toward the more recent years, something nagged at me. The photos grew sparser, and in the ones from the last decade, she was almost always alone. There she was, sitting on the dock with a book. There she was, standing beside what looked like a small vegetable garden. But I had no memory of her mentioning a garden up there. In several pictures she was laughing at something outside the frame, but it was a laugh I barely recognized. Not performed, not polite. The laugh she had when she stopped worrying about how she looked. When had she stopped looking like that at home? I closed the album. I went to bed. I lay awake until 3 in the morning asking myself questions I'd never thought to ask while she was alive. I left at 5:30 to avoid the city traffic. The highway north of Ottawa was empty and dark, and the trees on either side held their snow silently. By the time I turned off toward Lac des Pins, the sun was pale and low over the tree line and the shadows went on forever. I'd forgotten how beautiful that part of Ontario could be. Vivien had tried to describe it to me 100 times. The way the light came through the birches in October, the smell of the lake in the morning before the wind came up, the particular quiet of a place that had no cell service worth mentioning and no neighbors within earshot. I'd never really listened. The laneway down to the cabin was 2 ruts through the trees, barely visible under the snow. I almost missed the turnoff. At the end of the lane, the cabin came into view through the bare branches, and I saw immediately that Simone had been telling the truth about some of it. The back corner of the roof did sag slightly. One of the storm shutters on the side window had come loose and was hanging at an angle, but the front steps had new boards on them. Fresh cedar, pale against the weathered gray of the rest of the structure. And the path from the laneway to the door had been shoveled. I sat in the truck with the engine running for a long moment. The snow was undisturbed around the cabin, except for that shoveled path, and I realized a set of tracks between the woodpile and the door. Recent tracks. Someone was using this cabin. My first thought was to call the OPP. We'd had issues years ago with a camp on the neighboring lot being broken into over winter. But then I saw something that stopped me. Hanging in the window beside the front door was a suncatcher. A small stained glass cardinal. I knew that suncatcher. Vivien had bought it at the craft fair in Almonte the Christmas before last. She'd been so pleased with it that she'd held it up in the kitchen window to show me how the light came through. I'd barely looked up from the newspaper. I got out of the truck. The path had been salted. Someone had dragged a plastic runner out over the porch steps, the kind you use so nobody slips. I climbed those steps slowly and knocked. Sounds from inside. A chair pushing back, footsteps. The door opened. Standing there was a man roughly my age, maybe a few years older. He was tall but stooped at the shoulder, with a close-cropped white beard and the kind of hands that come from 60 years of working with them. He wore a wool sweater and was holding a mug of coffee. When he saw me, the color went out of his face like a light being switched off. "Ken," he said. Not a question. My name in this stranger's voice in the cabin on my property on Lac des Pins. He knew me. "I'm sorry," I managed. "I think there's been a mistake. This is my property. My name is Kenneth Marsh." The man closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they were wet. "My name is Arthur Peel," he said quietly. "I was your wife's oldest friend." I want to pause here for just a second. Because if you've ever heard a sentence that rearranged your understanding of your entire life, you know what happened to me in that doorway. The cold air, the snow, the bare trees, the stained glass cardinal in the window. Everything just stopped. "Come in," Arthur said. "Please. I'll explain everything. You deserve to know all of it." I stepped inside. The cabin was warm and smelled of wood smoke and coffee and something cooking low on the propane stove. It was neater than I'd expected from a squatter. Books stacked carefully on the shelves. A pair of work boots lined up beside the door. And on the kitchen table, a photograph I recognized from our own home. Vivian and I on our wedding day 38 years ago, outside St. Andrew's Presbyterian in Ottawa. Our copy was on the mantel. This was a second print. "You've been living here," I said. It wasn't a question. 3 winters, he said, and the last 2 summers as well. He set his coffee mug on the table and sat down heavily. I would have come to the funeral I wanted to. But I was in the hospital in October. Bypass. I only found out she was gone when I came back here in November, and there was a letter from her lawyer in the mail slot. He found out she was gone from a letter in a mail slot. I hadn't known he existed. "Vivian never mentioned you," I said. "I know." He looked down at his hands. "That was my fault, not hers. We had a falling out years and years ago. Stupid. The kind of argument that festers when neither person is willing to pick up the phone. We didn't speak for almost 12 years, and then 5 years ago she wrote me a letter out of nowhere. She'd found my address through the alumni office at Carleton. She said she was sorry for her part in it, that she'd been thinking about old friendships and how fragile they were. Vivien had gone to Carleton for her BFA in the 70s. She'd never talked much about that time. I'd assumed there was nothing particular to tell. She came up here that summer," Arthur continued. "We had a week of conversations that I think she needed badly, and I needed them too. My wife had died 2 years before. My kids were in Vancouver and didn't call much. I was renting a room in a house in Kirkland Lake that I hated." He paused. "She offered me the use of the cabin for the winter, just to give me somewhere decent to be for a while. A winter had become 3. "Did she know it would become permanent?" I asked. Arthur shook his head. "She didn't plan it that way. The first winter I offered to leave in the spring. She said stay, that the place needed someone in it or it would deteriorate. Second winter was the same. Last year." He stopped, looked at the table. "Last year she told me she was sick. Ovarian cancer. Stage 3, caught late. She said she hadn't told you." The room tilted. "She'd been coming up here for treatments," Arthur said carefully. "There's a Cancer Care Ontario clinic in North Bay. She told you she was coming up for her usual summer weeks." She was going to chemotherapy," I said. "For 18 months, he said. She stayed here between cycles. I drove her when she wasn't well enough to drive herself. I cooked for her when eating was hard. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the lake." 18 months. My wife had been in chemotherapy for 18 months and I hadn't known. While I had been in Ottawa playing golf at Riverside, reading Lee Valley catalogs, complaining mildly about the cold snap, my wife had been driving herself to cancer treatments in North Bay, and coming home looking tired in a way I'd attributed to the 4-hour drive. "The 4 times a year," I said slowly. "Yes," Arthur said. "Every cycle was roughly 12 to 14 weeks. The appointments lined up with the seasons." I sat down at the kitchen table. My legs had decided not to hold me anymore. "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked, though I wasn't really asking Arthur. He answered anyway. "She said you'd been through enough. That she'd watched you carry everyone for 40 years. She said you'd finally found some peace in retirement and she wasn't willing to take that from you." He paused. "And she said she needed to do something difficult on her own terms, just once. That she'd spent her whole adult life being a wife and a mother, and she wanted to face this as just herself." Just herself. Arthur stood and went to the small shelf beside the stove. He took down a wooden box, cedar by the look of it, dovetail corners with a small brass latch. He set it on the table in front of me. "She left this here," he said. "She told me if anything happened to her and you came to the cabin, I was to give this to you directly. Not to Conrad or Simone, to you." The box was locked. The key was taped to the bottom. "Take your time," Arthur said. "I'll go walk the property. Give you privacy." He put on his coat and boots and went out quietly. I sat alone with my wife's cedar box and the sound of the wood stove ticking. Inside were letters. Perhaps 30 of them, on different papers, different pens, different handwriting. Her handwriting at different stages of her illness, I understood now. The earliest ones were written on the stationery she used for her correspondence at home. The later ones were on plain notepaper, the handwriting getting larger and more deliberate as time went on. I picked one from roughly the middle. "My darling Ken, it's been 3 weeks since the second cycle ended, and I finally felt well enough today to walk down to the dock. The ice went out last week and the loons are back. Arthur made me a thermos of the soup I like and sat with me on the dock for an hour without talking, which is exactly what I needed from him. I keep thinking about calling you. I reach for my phone, and then I picture your face. Not a bad picture, just your face when you're worried, that particular crease above your left eyebrow that you've had since you were 40. And I put the phone back down. You've been so steady in your retirement, Ken. Golf with Patrick and the boys. The woodworking in the garage. The way you laugh at the radio in the mornings, which you never used to do. I haven't seen you that easy in yourself since before the firm went public and everything got complicated. How can I take that from you? How can I call you and say, come sit with me while they put poison in my blood, come watch me sleep 12 hours and still wake up exhausted, come be afraid with me? You've been afraid enough. I know what it cost you when your father went. I know what it cost you when we lost the baby between Conrad and Simone. You carried all of it and you never once put it down until now. Lourdes says, no. Arthur says I keep mixing them up, I haven't been sleeping. Arthur says I'm being selfish with you. That I'm taking away your chance to be present for something that matters. But Ken, you've been present for everything that mattered for 38 years. Maybe this one thing can be mine. I love you. I have loved you every single day, including the days when we felt like two people living in parallel rather than together. Especially those days, because they made me understand how much I needed you to be there even when I wasn't looking. All my love, your Viv. I had to stop. The paper shook in my hands. I set it down on the table and put my face in my hands and cried the way I hadn't cried since the morning she died. Not the composed, managed grief I'd maintained for 8 months. Something older and rawer than that. My wife had been sick and she had faced it the way she faced everything. On her own terms, protecting people she loved from costs they hadn't agreed to pay. And I had been in Ottawa raking leaves and going to the hardware store and not noticing. After a long while I picked up another letter. This one was recent. The handwriting was wider, more careful. The way your handwriting gets when holding a pen has become an effort. Ken, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've found your way to the cabin. I'm glad. I hoped you would come. I hoped the cabin would pull you here the way it's always pulled me, even if it took losing me to make it happen. There's something I need to tell you that will be hard to hear, and I'm sorry for that, but you deserve to know it. Our children know about Arthur. I read that sentence 3 times. Conrad found out 14 months ago. He was reviewing the property insurance. I'd given him signing authority on the account after the first round of chemo, when I thought it would make things simpler. He saw a second name on the account for the phone line at the cabin. He hired someone to look into it. When they found Arthur living at Lac des Pins, Conrad didn't come to me. He came here. He told Arthur he was trespassing. He told him he'd contact the OPP and have him charged. He told him that as a sick old man with no legal claim to the property he'd be lucky not to end up with a criminal record. Arthur called me that same night, frightened and devastated. I was in North Bay at the time, 4 days out from a treatment cycle, barely able to drive. I got in the car and drove up to the cabin anyway. I had it out with Conrad in that kitchen, Ken. I want you to know that. I told him the truth about the cancer, about Arthur, about all of it. I thought if he understood, if he saw what this friendship had meant during the hardest year of my life, he would come around. He told me I wasn't thinking clearly. He told me illness had compromised my judgment. He told me that a man living rent-free on our property was a liability and an embarrassment. Simone was kinder in her tone. But what she said was almost worse. She said, "Mom, we would have been there for you. You didn't have to find some stranger to do this." Ken, they would not have been there for me. Not in the way I needed. They would have been there for themselves. For their own fear, their own grief, their own sense of what things should look like. Arthur never needed me to perform being sick in a way that was acceptable. He sat with me in the dark and didn't need me to reassure him. I gave Conrad and Simone an ultimatum. Either they would leave Arthur alone and allow me to make my own choices about my own property, or I would revise the will and they would find out what I meant by that. Conrad said I was being manipulated. He said it coldly, the way he says things he's decided, and I understood then something that broke my heart a little. My son has confused being practical with being right for so long that he can no longer tell the difference. I spoke with a lawyer in North Bay. Her name is Frances Tremblay, and she has offices on Main Street West. She has all the documentation. She has options laid out for you. Ken, I need to tell you something else, and I hope you can hear it without too much pain. I wasn't only keeping the cancer from you. I was keeping the cabin from you too in a different way. Every summer I went up there, I think part of me was going to find myself again. The woman who used to paint and paddle and stay up reading until 2 in the morning. The woman who existed before I became primarily your wife and their mother. Which I never resented, I want you to understand that clearly, but which, over time, quietly swallowed some other version of me whole. Arthur let me be that woman. He knew her from before. And being known from before when you're 63 and sick and frightened, turns out to be one of the most important things in the world. Don't be angry at what you find. Be curious about it. That's all I ask. I love you more than I know how to say even after all this practice. You're Viv. I sat in that cabin kitchen for a long time. The wood stove clicked and settled. The light moved across the floor as the sun shifted behind the clouds. Through the window I could see Arthur walking along the lakeshore, his hands in his pockets, his breath making small white clouds above him. I thought about my wife. 38 years. The person sleeping beside me for 38 years had been fighting cancer alone and driving herself to North Bay in a Subaru she'd put 200,000 kilometers on, and coming home looking tired, and I had said, "Long drive, hey," and gone back to my book. There was a soft knock at the door. Arthur put his head in. "Everything all right?" "Come in," I said. "Tell me about her, what she was like up here." He came in and sat down and we talked for 3 hours. He told me about the summer she'd decided to start painting again after 20 years away from it, and had covered 6 canvases in a week, because the light on the lake was what she'd been trying to find all along. He told me about the autumn morning when the chemo had made her too sick to get out of bed, and she'd made him read her Gerard Manley Hopkins aloud until she fell asleep. He told me she'd spoken about me constantly, not with resentment, with a kind of loyal love that still knew exactly what it was looking at. "She said you had a gift for woodworking you'd stopped using," Arthur said. "I haven't touched it in years," I said. "She said you'd gotten practical, that you decided making beautiful things required a justification you couldn't find." I looked at the dovetail corners on the cedar box. "She kept the box I built her when we were first married. She brought it up here so it would be safe," Arthur said. "She said it was the most important thing you'd ever made with your hands, and she wasn't leaving it in a house she wouldn't be coming back to." My phone had been buzzing since noon. I turned it over. 11 missed calls from Conrad, 4 from Simone. A text from Conrad, "Dad, where are you? We know you went up there. Do not make any decisions about the property without consulting us first. Do not make decisions about my own property, my wife's property." "Arthur," I said, "my children are going to come up here." He nodded slowly. "I expected as much. They're going to tell you again that you have no right to be here." "Yes, they'd be wrong," I said. "But I need a few days to sort out exactly how wrong." I called Frances Tremblay's office from the cabin landline. She picked up on the first ring as though she'd been expecting the call for months. "Mr. Marsh," she said. "I'm so sorry about Vivian. She was remarkable." "She was," I said. "I'm only beginning to understand how much." Frances's office was in a Victorian on Main Street West in North Bay, the kind of building that looks like it was always a lawyer's office and always will be. She was in her late 50s, brisk and warm in equal measure, and she'd clearly thought a great deal of my wife. "Vivian was meticulous," Frances said, spreading a folder on her desk. "She spent the better part of 18 months thinking through every scenario. She wanted to be sure Arthur was protected, that you had options, and that the whole thing could survive a challenge from your children if it came to that." "And could it?" "Yes, she did everything correctly." Frances laid out 3 documents. "There's a secondary clause in the estate that entitles Arthur Peel to continued occupancy of the Lac des Pines property for as long as he chooses, with all operating costs covered by a life insurance policy Vivien purchased specifically for this purpose. Your children cannot override this. It's part of the estate and it's been filed with the court." I looked at the policy. The premium had been paid out of an account I hadn't known existed. Vivien had set it up from her portion of the sale of her mother's house in Timmins years ago. "She also left you options regarding the property itself," Frances continued. "Option 1, you sell the cabin. Arthur receives 2 years' notice and $100,000 in compensation. Your children would receive their share of the proceeds. Option 2, you retain ownership and formalize Arthur's occupancy under a proper tenancy agreement with full legal protection. Option 3, she paused. Option 3, you sign the cabin over to Arthur outright. A smaller property in the area, which Vivien identified and had appraised, would be purchased from the insurance proceeds for your own use if you wish to stay in the area." She slid a property listing across the desk. A small year-round cottage on the same lake, 3 properties down from the cabin. It had a workshop space attached to the garage. Vivien had planned for the possibility that I might want to be there, near Arthur, near the lake she'd loved, near the version of herself she'd reclaimed in her final years. "She hoped you would choose option 3, Frances said quietly. "She said that?" "She said you'd been drifting since retirement. She said you needed something to build." I looked at the listing for the small cottage. I thought about the cedar box with the dovetail corners. I thought about 6 canvases painted in a week by a woman who'd found the light she'd been looking for. "There's one more thing," Frances said. She slid an envelope across the desk. "She asked me to give you this only if you came to the cabin yourself." It was a note card, just a few lines. Vivien's handwriting careful and firm. "Kenneth." If you're reading this, you did the thing I always hoped you'd do. You went without being asked twice. Don't let Conrad and Simone bury what we might still be able to build. Choose the lake. Choose the life we forgot to have together until it was almost too late. And please, go find where you put your chisels. All my love forever, your Viv. I drove back to the cabin. Arthur was on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee when I pulled in, as though he'd known roughly when to expect me. I climbed the steps and took the mug he offered, and stood looking at the lake, which was beginning to catch the last of the afternoon light in that particular copper and gray way that Vivian had tried to describe to me 100 times. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to honor her wishes," I said. "Which means you're staying." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to do that, Ken. The legal protection she set up is already there. You don't need to go to option 3. "I know," I said. "I'm not doing it because I have to." We stood on the porch without talking for a while, listening to the lake. I understood now why she'd needed this place. The noise of a life lived mainly for other people gets very loud over the decades, and some people need somewhere quiet to hear themselves think. My phone was buzzing in my pocket. I took it out, looked at Conrad's name on the screen, and turned it off. 2 days later, Conrad and Simone drove up. I'd expected anger. What I got was something more complicated, a kind of stunned quiet when they came through the door, and saw Arthur and I sitting at the kitchen table over a pot of tea with Francis Tremblay's documents laid out between us. "Dad," Conrad started. "We need to talk about—" "Sit down," I said. It came out quieter than I intended, but it stopped him. They sat. "I know that you knew about Arthur," I said. "I know what you said to him. I know what you said to your mother." Simone's face went pale. Conrad looked at the table. "I know she was sick," I continued. "I know she faced it alone, which is something I'm going to have to live with. And I know you knew she was sick and you kept that from me too. Dad, we were trying to protect you. You were protecting the estate," I said. Not harshly. Just plainly. "There's a difference. Your mother knew the difference." Conrad opened his mouth and closed it again. "I'm not going to spend the rest of whatever time I have left arguing about this," I said. "I'm signing the cabin over to Arthur. That decision is made and it won't be reversed. Francis has already filed the paperwork." I paused. "What happens next between us is up to you. Your mother asked me not to write you off, so I haven't. But I need you to understand that the version of me who lets his children manage his life is gone. Your mother took him with her." Simone started crying. Real crying, not strategic crying. I think she genuinely loved her mother, in the way that people love people they've taken for granted so thoroughly they don't realize it until they're gone. Conrad sat very still for a long time. Then he said with some effort, "Did she suffer a lot?" "She had her hard days," Arthur said quietly from across the table. "But she had a lot of good days too, up here. She was happy, Mr. Marsh. That's the honest truth of it." Conrad looked at Arthur for a long moment. I don't know what he was deciding. But something in his face shifted, not into warmth, exactly, but into something that might, given time, become it. They drove back to Toronto that evening. We didn't resolve everything. I don't expect we will, not quickly. But we didn't end it either, and Vivian had asked me not to end it. So, that night I slept in the back bedroom of the cabin, the one with the slightly sagging roof, which Arthur and I had propped up with a temporary brace until spring, and I listened to the lake in the dark. There was ice forming at the shoreline, making small sounds. The loons were long gone south. But the silence itself had a quality I hadn't encountered in years. Clean and enormous and belonging to nobody in particular. In the morning Arthur made coffee and I found Vivian's painting supplies stacked neatly in the closet. Her tubes of cadmium yellow and phthalo blue, her favorite flat brushes, 3 blank canvases she'd never gotten to. In the back of the closet, behind the painting supplies, was a wooden tool cabinet I hadn't put there. Pine with hand-cut joints. A small brass nameplate on the front, engraved in letters I recognized immediately. K. Marsh, woodworker. She'd had it made for me. She'd brought it up here years ago and stocked it. Chisels, gouges, a card scraper, a set of Japanese pull saws, and left it waiting, in case I found my way there. I'm going to stay in the area for a while. I've put in an offer on the small cottage 3 properties down, the one Francis showed me. It has a south-facing workshop off the garage that gets good light until 3 in the afternoon. The cabin belongs to Arthur now, legally and rightly, and he's already making plans to fix the back bedroom roof properly in the spring. And if you're listening tonight, if you're somewhere in this country at whatever hour it is, I want to ask you something before you go. When did you last go looking for the version of yourself that got buried under the years? Not the version other people needed. The one that was there before all the requirements piled up. Your people are worth your attention. But so are you. Your mother knew that. So did mine. So did Vivian. They all figured it out the same hard way. Comment 1 if you think I did the right thing with the cabin. Comment 2 if you think Conrad deserved a harder conversation than I gave him. Comment 3 if you've ever found out, too late, that someone you loved was carrying something alone. And tell me where you're watching from. It's late here on the lake and the ice is quiet, and I'd like to know I'm not the only one still awake. She was right about the light, by the way. First thing this morning, just after the sun came over the tree line, it hit the water in a way I don't have words for yet. But I think I might try to find some.